Welcome to 4 Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's 4 Quarter Lives, I talk with Charlie Rogers, author of Undefinable Life Design: How to Design a Unique Life that Sustains Your Energy and Income. Charlie's 28 years old, but don't let that fool you. He's already built businesses, communities, experiments, workshops, and a body of thinking around a question that is becoming central across the life course. How do you build a life that reflects who you really are, rather than simply inherit the script you were given? What makes this conversation so interesting is that although Charlie speaks from the vantage point of Gen Z, many of the themes he explores are deeply familiar to anyone entering a new life stage. The tension between freedom and commitment, the pressure to perform a perfect life, the search for work that aligns with identity, values, energy, and the growing desire to live beyond a single label or career track. We talk about his idea of the golden thread, the challenge younger people face entering a more unstable and AI-shaped labor market, and why organizations still misread Gen Z as lazy, when what they may actually be seeing is a generation refusing to build lives that no longer make sense. It's a conversation about youth, yes, but also about reinvention, identity, and designing lives that fit at every age. Charlie Rogers, welcome to 4 Quarter Lives.
Avivah, thank you so much for having me.
Now, I'm really looking forward to this conversation about your hot off the press new book called Undefinable Life Design. And I wanted to first just start with, what does that word undefinable capture about how your generation thinks about work and life today?
So I'm part of Generation Z.
You might want to share your age just so our listeners can situate in where in Gen Z you may be.
So towards the top end, I am 28. Several different months throughout my life that I'm sure we'll go through, but it's definitely been a working world for my parents. And I feel like the word undefinable really is the sort of essence of change that we're seeing and that we're getting realized too. So in front of us is less a world that's predictable and more unpredictable, changing and exponentially morphing into something which is harder to contain, but also harder to find our place within. And so undefinable for me and for those that I've helped through the Undefinable Community or directly are often looking for a way to express themselves beyond fitting into a nice corporate or a nice existing label that might identify ourselves as one role or one identity. We want to be many roles and many identities.
And we'll talk about how that's such an interesting parallel with the senior, older folk I am often talking to and about. But let's start maybe with your own path. You have a very interesting background, even though you're only this tender young age of 28. You've done a hell of a lot. Ironman competitions, building communities, starting ventures. You're not exactly your typical Gen Z. So how much of your story reflects your generation? How much is your own kind of extreme version? And give us the sort of red arc as you see it from where you're sitting now.
So I'd say I capture an element of my generation in the way I've had the world happen to me. But I feel like the way I've responded to it and saw opportunities out of perhaps the chaos or the external factors that have been placed on me, I feel like that might be a bit more of the extreme response. And so some of the milestones that I've seen is that when I was 18, I was the youngest person to vote Remain. Hence, it was the referendum on my 18th birthday.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you, Charlie. We tried.
We did try, yeah. It was so close. And I went to bed thought we'd be okay. And then woke up the next morning and it wasn't. So the worst birthday present I've ever received, maybe. I graduated.
Not to you as a 18-year-old. Do you remember at the time?
I remember the day I was out. It was the last day of my exams. I had 2 exams that day, A-levels. And I was out celebrating with some friends for my birthday. And literally in the pub, it was all green, all good. And then literally came back and the next morning was pretty shocked to see that that was the response.
Do you remember what you thought? Like, what did you think your elders had done to you?
Well, I'd always felt that I was not, in a sense, British. I feel more British now, but at the time I felt more like European or global as a person. And that decision to leave, I felt like stripped me of that identity and said to me, oh, you can't be part of this global economy. You have to be part of this one piece of land because that's what matters. When in fact, I was very much voting for being included in this much more globalized world. And so, yeah, it felt like a stripping of identity in a lot of parts too.
Yep. You weren't alone.
Yeah. And then what followed was perhaps another external environment, which was the global pandemic. So March 2020, that was in my final year of university.
Got it at the beginning and then again at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Both ends of it.
Wham. Slam, bam.
That then meant that our exams were online, but also all of my friends had just lost their graduate jobs too. And they'd all been told that, we'll take a year out, just pause it for a year, or we can't start right now. We have to figure something else out. And so that then became a reality for all of them as well. And so for me, responding to both was, again, kind of interesting. So at university in the 4 years in between, should we say, I decided in my second year that I was going to take a year out and start my first business called Posty, which was a parcel box that could attach to your house to receive deliveries for you. Took it from a concept and built a team, got a prototype on a wall, received deliveries. It was pretty cool. And then I got into sort of February, March time, 2020, and I was like, do I want to sell parcel boxes in the next 5 years? Not really, but also, aren't we all at home now? And is that going to be so useful? Not so much. So those things collided. And then I decided to close that business. But out of the final year with exams online came opportunity. And so my housemates and I had a series of different events we were going to run to keep ourselves entertained. And one of them was to do a hackathon. We'd just seen all of our fellow students lose their summer jobs. So we're like, okay, we get them to problem solve real challenges that businesses actually face, and startups were adapting to COVID. And so it felt like the perfect time. Hosted it, 9 students, 3 businesses, and then ran it monthly and ran 30 plus events over the next year and a half, 2 years, and became known as House Hack. And that was then my second business. And we tried different ways of monetizing it, but the one that stuck was that if we placed this Gen Z talent into startups who are looking to engage young people and to bring them in environments where they could actually see them in action in a virtual way that was lower cost than holding assessment centers, but also was natural in the sense they were assessed by the young people, it would bring out the best. And so we placed talent into startups through it. And then towards the end of 21, the world then flips and you start going to hybrid and in person. And then I was like, we have to adapt this whole business back to being an in-person business. And that's a very different model than one that we built, which was based on people dedicating 8 hours on a Saturday every 4 weeks to doing it, which is quite a lot of time to ask for. So the business model didn't hold up in a in-person reality. And so closed that business and then started portfolio working on trialing many different sources of income. Firstly, did a bit of project management and then did a bit of coaching on some of the lessons I learned from the first 2 businesses. And then I started wrote a newsletter. That's how we met, through the Substack Grow program as well. And kept documenting, kept showing up. I've been on LinkedIn since I first decided to share my journey of taking on the year enterprise, my third year at university. And so I'd used to publishing videos once a week. Every Sunday would sit down and put 5-minute video out. And so I then just thought, how could I do more of that? The newsletter became the piece for it. And then I trialed different ways. I worked with LinkedIn on their how-to hybrid creator program that I was leading on, which was basically how can organizations engage individuals in hybrid work and how can they create it in a way that reflects their organizational signature, so their unique way of working. That was a pretty interesting creator program to be on. And then this all led me to join the Portfolio Collective at the end of March 23, which was an organization with 15,000 portfolio professionals in the community and helping them to learn, grow, and develop in many ways. And I basically chose to apply for the role I could at the time, which is sort of founders associate role, where I get closest to the 2 mentors that I could have, Ben and Fiona. Studied under them for a year and a half, 2 years, learned all I could about the future of work, what those in their 40s, 50s, 60s were really succeeding with. And then alongside built a community called the Undefinable Community as a nonprofit. and found that those in the age of discovery who are 22 and 35, who were really considering what their many interests are and who they are as a person, what they could learn from these senior portfolio professionals who are earning really quite a lot more as being focused experts in one thing than being freelancers or multi-hyphenates or side hustlers in many things. And so how could we give the undefinable who wants to be everything the focus of a focused expert who could then earn the freedom and money and time to do the work they wanted, but on their own terms? And so as I kept writing, as I kept coaching, as I kept doing workshops inside, out of different companies, I then found in early 24 the kind of frameworks for the book. And I was like, okay, I've got it. I now have to turn my newsletter into a book. And then that started a 2-year process of slowly writing before I left TBC end of 24, and then going all in January 25 of the year and a bit that followed up until now, where I basically refined, iterated, went through 5 versions of the book and had 110 people read it early as well and give me beta testing feedback on how to improve it, and then got to the final version that's out there in the world and reflects all that I've learned in the past several years of my own journey, but also my clients' journey and some of those that I've met along the way as well.
So your whole life is like a startup. I mean, you're just a perfect sort of ideation, brainstorming, product design, test run, and iterate.
Yeah, 100%. It's like you...
And a little bit of running on the side, as I understand, since you also somehow, in addition to all of that stuff that you just listed, you also became a bit of an athlete, which is not your occupation or side hustle.
So I managed to earn a bit of money through it as well, which is quite cool.
Yeah, no, I love the way you think of all your different streams as potential revenue sources, not just...
Yeah, why not? Why not? If I'm going to share about my journey running anyway, I might as well see if I can get a sponsor. So it started with, at school, being one of the worst ones there. And then by the time I left school at 18, I was the vice captain. So I got pretty good. It's a sort of sport, but the more effort you put in, the more results you get out. And then went to Loughborough, and then you get to being the worst again because they're all international athletes. So then by the time I left Loughborough, I wasn't the vice captain, but I was pretty good. And then I translated that running background into triathlon, went and took on an Ironman in 2022. And then I also qualified to represent GB at the European Champs as well in triathlon the following year. Did London Marathon, did an ultra marathon last year as well, and just love, pushing myself, seeing what the body can do.
What's next? What's after ultra? Are we peaking or are we keeping going?
I think in this last year, I've taken it all a lot slower. So I've definitely found a way of sport.
Writing does that too.
Yeah, rather than it being this like obsession, I feel like I've obsessed with it too long. So I feel like I can now, just enjoy it for the sake of it. So more time in the hills, more time in the mountains, but not necessarily a race.
Which is part of what you argue in the book, is that life design isn't just purpose or income, but it's really about managing your energy, of which you have considerable amounts. What role has energy played in choosing how you work and live? And it sounds like now you're in a slightly different energetic balance than you have been.
Increasingly crucial.
Quickly, right? So.
Yeah. So I'd say when I think about energy, I think about a thawing of the ability to feel first. So a lot of life can be fast paced. It can be caught up in the moment of it. And how do you then take a step back and listen to what your body's actually telling you, which I feel in today's world of like speed, it can be really hard to do so. But when you do, and you stop trying to numb yourself and you stop trying to listen to what your body's saying, it becomes a lot easier to know that thing will take a lot more energy from me. Like even only on Friday when I did sort of 7 hours of being on trains, having to go back from Cornwall and then travel across London to get to the events and then come back home, I was like, wow, this is really draining in a way that logically it shouldn't be. I just sat on trains and maybe I've done a bit of work on them or read, but it shouldn't be draining in the same way that being on calls or writing is, but actually it is more so. And so I find that now it's a lot more about what's the physical environment and what's the social environment and how does it all blend together and how do I retain that energy even though I might be overwhelmed by things that shouldn't be energy expending.
I love that you are maturing into this like new energetic balance. It reassures me slightly. And maybe that's a good place to kick off into how we can start sort of comparing your kind of quarter life moment and all the explorations I've been doing around midlife. As you well know, I describe life today in 4 quarters. So you've been watching and helping and accompanying a whole community of people move from Q1 to Q2, what I tend to call the age of commitments, and you're redefining into undefinables. And I do a lot of going from the second to the third. So what shocks or wake-up calls would you say you've most observed, seen, or experienced in that transition, Q1 to Q2?
There's definitely a phase of denial first. Ooh, maybe I don't need to grow up. Maybe I can just stay in this forever. Maybe it's if I just keep discovering and keep doing the next challenge and distracting myself with sport, with achievement, holidays, travel, anything, I will not have to settle down or be focused. I can just do everything because there's this idea that I have so much potential and so much opportunity. Of course I can. But then at some point you realize there might be so many paths out there, but which one is the right one for me? And there's sometimes a moment like a kind of illness or a medical emergency that kind of puts that front and center for you. Or there's like a longer term relationship comes into play. And then you start thinking more seriously, oh, we're going to think about house, kids. Oh, they are like real commitments. I'm going to have to pay for that for the next 25, 30 years, if not longer. How do I now think about moving into that commitments and moving into it with intention? And so there's this whole like sometimes a moment, but often a rising tide of commitments and seriousness, should we say, of which people enter into. And it's how do you retain the joy in it? How do you get serious without losing what feels like play? And yeah, I've seen definitely a trend of people leaning either one way, too much into play of I'll distract myself, or too much into seriousness of I must get everything sorted all the time because I must have all the answers, when often the real juice exists in between where you can do both and blend them in an intentional way.
Yes, absolutely. Do you find that people kind of personality-wise tend to lean? I mean, what is it that makes people lean one way? Some people would describe it as sort of moving towards security and meaning as the sort of polar opposites. You're talking about kind of play versus commitment feeling. Feels a bit the same thing. Do you think that's personality, it's pressures, it's family orientation, cultural? What's at play?
All of the above. But I would give some examples of recently been chatting to a couple people from Anthropy where I went down last week, and one of them spoke about her parents' pressure that she feels to be, she's from India, and her parents, if she's not sort of in a long-term relationship towards marriage by 25, then they will find her a partner, and they will be quite upfront about it. And they will be like, look, you're going to get matched with this person so that you could be potentially like married to them. And so they feel as a kind of culture ashamed of if they don't have their kids set up to be in a long-term relationship. And I also read a piece recently about China and the dating dynamics existing there, which is almost the same pressure but on steroids. Of they talk about these like parents that go in these umbrella economies, and they put the notes of what their children can offer in front, and they speak about everything apart from personality, apart from looks, apart from all the traditionally Western ways of viewing romance. And it's purely a transaction of how many cars, what's the income, what's the family name, where they want to go, what's the job occupation. Like it's all of the status related symbols, which I feel can drive that commitments even earlier in certain cultures. And I feel for those that perhaps are more Western or more from the UK or Europe, I've seen a bit more of a free flowing, trying to find the right person to commit to and with, rather than allowing themselves to flow until that happens. But from a more kind of Asian background, there's definitely a familial pressure by default to have that partner, potentially a lot earlier than we're used to in the UK.
You might be shocked by some of the research I've seen that shows that 10 years out, arranged marriages are happier than the ones we choose ourselves.
Still married the parents are.
So I'll tell you, maybe parents know more than we think, but we'll leave that topic. That could be a whole other podcast in itself. What I am curious about is a lot of the questions and choices that you underline of people asking, particularly in their late 20s, echo a lot what I hear people asking in their late 50s. So basically you and your parents, or your generation and your generation's parents, often come to these moments of what do I want to be when I grow up? And what do I want to be when I grow old? At almost the same time. Do you see that at all?
Yeah, for sure. I've seen either side of having kids. It's kind of the way of thinking about it in my mind, which is you're either committing for the long haul, it's air quotes, or you've just come up for air after you've been committed for so long. So there's kind of that feeling of, what do I want life to be for the next 20 years? Or what was life like for the last 20 years? And now I've got a whole new chapter ahead of me. And this is a lot about what you speak about, but it's that whole reinvention of there's now a Q4. So there's definitely a feeling of recommitment, rebirth, and rediscovery of this is the thing I want to do for the next long period of time.
Exactly. And sort of settling into it. So through your community, maybe you can describe it a little bit, your Undefinable community and conversations with them. What do you think are the biggest expectations now? And how does your book kind of guide people working through them a little bit more methodically?
So the Undefinable Community founded March 2023, and it's been 3 years. Celebrated the birthday only a few days ago. It was pretty lovely. And we do a bunch of different events, all focused on providing intimate spaces for those who live beyond labels, so the undefinables. And these often look like our flagship events, which are retreats, the 3-day.
Say a bit what you mean by living beyond labels. I love that expression. So
when we meet
for the thinking behind it.
Yeah, so when we meet one another, we're not looking for that surface level connection. We're looking for that deeper rooted, who is this person and their values? What do they hold true to themselves? And what is it beneath the surface that I can't see at first glance? Committing by virtue of the name to not judge them based on their external appearance, looking for a way of connecting beyond that. And so that way of seeing the world, of we're not all just runners in a run club, we're not all just founders in a founders dinner. We are all undefinables doing very different things with our lives, but we share the same values, I feel holds a lot more deeply to creating a sense of community that I've thought about as like having a neighbor of, I might not see them all as friends, but I will know people on my street because I interact with them frequently. And as this community continues to grow, it's how do I keep waving at the neighbors? How do I keep becoming a good villager and show up for those that are around me? Because we have the shared way of seeing the world, the shared values of what is the right or wrong thing to do, but also they might be quite different and live very different lives to us. But we do retreats. So we do the 3 days, 2 nights retreats out of inside nature. We do explorations, which are half-day workshops, and we do celebrations, which are the lighter moments where we go and we have like Christmas parties, summer picnics and the like as well. So do all of that times by member-led meetups, and our virtual spaces just literally moved to Circle away from WhatsApp very recently, and that is a whole new breath of fresh air for what the community can be. It's all in one place, which is really awesome. But what are they seeing? I would say the expectations they are facing are around having it figured out in a world that makes less and less sense. So for them, it's either a feeling of, should I just take the default path of go and work at a big corporate like a Goldman Sachs, or ones that could earn me a great amount of money in a short period of time and save a lot by doing so, and then use that to buy the house and set up the life that I want. This is the path that potentially our parents or our schools prepared us for. But others are also questioning, okay, like I could do that, but are there other ways in between? Maybe I can do fractional work. I can work 3 days a week and 2 days a week somewhere else, or I can do 2 and 2, or I can consider working in ways that aren't more normal. And they're doing that because they're sensing this disconnect from purpose. So those that end up in the corporate role, they often feel, oh, I'm just showing up here for the money, but the money isn't actually as good as my parents told me it would be, because it doesn't save for the house and the life milestones like they did before. And there's that increasing feeling of it being further and further out of reach. And so it doesn't feel worth the commitments in the same way. And so there are people who in the community are often questioning whether that's the right path and are looking for one that's aligned, as I speak to in my book, to their golden thread, to their way of showing up in the world that connects their interests and alights them as well.
Talk a little bit about the golden thread, this idea that is the kind of underpinning of your book and the pillars on which it relies.
So the golden thread is made up of the materials of your many interests. So when you reflect, firstly, you'll see ones that are inherited from your parents, that are outdated. Perhaps you loved them a little while ago, but not right now. Current, soon, or ideal. You first gather the materials of them, and then you combine the interest. You look for the overlaps. So if I like hiking, I like running, I like cycling. Oh, why do I like them? Oh, because they're adventure sports. Okay, cool. So that's the category. We find out which are the sort of 5 to 7 categories that overlap all of our interests. And then from them, we look for, okay, who is it that we often feel called to help? Is there a particular person that when we speak to them, they're like, oh, that's so useful. That's the kind of advice that we love hearing. That's the kind of impact that I really want to make on the world. And then how do you bring it to life through your categories that you've defined as well? So it's the sort of I help, the who, to, and that's the outcome, the how, and then through the what, which is the semi-professional categories as well. And I talk about this idea of it not having to be pro in just one thing in a defined area that currently exists. So often you look at an athlete, and I've lived this life myself, you can see that there are those that commit so much to one discipline that they become the best in the world at it. They win the gold medal. They become the known athlete in that domain. They're the ones you see on the front pages, but you often forget about the silver medalists or the bronze medalists or the ones that even make the top 3. And they've committed arguably the same amount of time to that exact same domain and profession, but they haven't quite achieved the same outcome. And because of that lack of achievement, they then feel like that path wasn't quite what they wanted it to be. And so that is the idea of being professional. And one thing is you're competing in an existing category. I say instead, aim to be semi-pro at a few things where you're good enough that you can knowingly understand what the area is about and you can contribute meaningfully to it. But you are then looking for ways to recombine those existing skills together rather than seeing it as competing in one area that already exists. And so I say, how do you bring that to life? By helping this one person through your golden thread, by combining those categories.
I think it's a remarkably mature, kind of well-rounded view of life that many great thinkers have come to at much older ages. And it's so lovely to see somebody in their 20s already pushing this idea with, so much energy, thought, and then I've seen your community, so much enthusiasm for this vision. And I'm struck a little bit as I hear many older leaders who kind of think Gen Z simply doesn't want to work as hard. And I look at how hard you guys work in so many kind of multiple streams, and this idea of semi-pro or being good enough is a very tempting one. What do you think the old folk are actually reacting to? Maybe they're just envious of your portfolio dreams.
I think there's a level to that of there's a admiration perhaps for the younger generation that's willing to say that the default way of working doesn't have to be the same way forever. Like there's a promise of reduced working hours through industrialization, yet we're all working the same hours, if not more than before. Like where did that go wrong? So there's a willingness to question the status quo that I think older generations are perhaps looking at the younger ones and saying, that's quite impressive, though it does also impede on me a little bit. Like, how do I make sense of this? And so caught in between in our own framing around those that are more 25 and 55, there are those that are already committed and want life to continue as normal because it pays the mortgage, it makes sense of the chaos, and it turns it into something that's understandable and can be put on a financial balance sheet. While either side, there are those that are retiring, shall we say, from normal corporate life and are thinking, how do I now design my life? And how do I do it in a really interesting way that blends all the skills, network, and everything that I've learned? And there are those that are younger that are thinking, I don't want to commit to a path that doesn't pay me very well in the same way it did my parents or doesn't offer me the same lifestyle that I might have had before. And so they're actually kind of meeting either side of being like, this is really interesting. But the ones in between are kind of trying to hold the ship together. And so they're the ones that are taking the workload, that are taking a lot more of the trying to find a way of making sense of it all. And I'd say to them that the younger generation will work hard for them and they will show up for them, but only if they feel as if that their direction matters and that they are overlapping with what the organization is standing for as well. If their golden thread can be threaded into the organization's mission, that will make a huge difference.
So that's where I wanted to end up on this idea of designing work that works for this generation. So if you're talking now to a company, who wants to engage and is engaging younger talent, although you might want to throw in your reaction to this AI, the perilous state of employment under AI. What are they most misunderstanding about your generation?
They are looking at them and seeing laziness, but what they're actually seeing is an ability to stand in their values and say that this is not the life that I want. I want something different. And in fact, the opportunity is there to shape it with them and to be leaders together of what they're creating, rather than to say, you don't know what you're on about, just fit the status quo, do it all again, and just stand in line. Like, no, if you're willing to, it hasn't got to be a huge change, but if you're willing to adapt even slightly to what they're saying and are willing to invite them into the conversation and have it with them around where they want to go, what they want to become, if they want to run a side hustle outside of their main role, if they want to go and have a few years experience with you and then go on and build their own thing afterwards, but want you to do some of the angel investment as a company into it, great. Like, have that conversation about different ways of working, and that it hasn't got to be the same 10-year, 20-year progression ladder that has existed for decades. Like, it can be different and it can be unique. And if you work with them, you'll find a much better answer that will retain them for several years, if not as an advocate for life. They might send you the next employee that you might have, or might become your supplier, might become your client, might become a different way of engaging with you beyond the traditional employer-employee dynamic that exists.
So you guys seem to be fronting this unbelievable tech-enabled recruitment machine now, where the idea of having a conversation with a human is far removed. What's the reaction? Like, how do you navigate that when you're an undefinable who wants to do many things and wants to plead your golden threads alignment with a company's mission, when all you're seeing is some robot reading your CVs and looking for keywords?
You try and look for the back door. So instead of being hired through the front end of, I'll use my AI to convince your AI that I'm a good fit for your role. Like, great, here we go again. Let's instead form one-on-one personal connections with those that can get us invited into private networks or introduced into the right names that could vouch for us. If we get an in-person conversation and it's the right fit, we know we can do a lot better than if we are just writing a CV and sending it off into the ether. So the Undefinable is willing to think differently. They're willing to lead with content, be permissionless in how they show up, and just try their bet anyway and see what happens. And I think that is the type of person that you're often looking for in your organization, is those that are willing to think entrepreneurially and are willing to do things different rather than just following the status quo. Often the best innovation and the best business growth for the long term happens when innovation is involved, and innovation comes from doing things differently, and the Undefinable is the one that will do that.
So you're organizing workshops now for organizations based around some of these principles. What are you proposing? How are you suggesting that they work with you to tap into some of this kind of innovation?
So I'm proposing that they lead on the conversation around life design. So instead of letting the individuals figure out themselves and say, oh, yeah, you might be part of this for the next 1.3 years on average, which is the Gen Z, then actually having that conversation early and being like, what is the life you want to live? What is your golden thread? How do your many interests make sense of this? And what role does work play in it right now? And can we move you to a more aligned role that you might want to stay in more longer term, particularly if we have such a wide organization with many teams to be part of? How do we bring it all together so that you can go on a progression journey that's unique to you and that can look like an exit plan in 3-5 years that can shape into the life you actually want to live? So it's having those conversations intentionally. It's finding their golden thread, because they might not know it themselves and they might just be bundling from one role to the other and thinking about what pays them the most. But instead, if you help them understand who they are and then you connect it to the organization's mission, it's a much stronger means of connecting to people and having Gen Z last a lot longer in their role.
I laugh because I'm working with organizations to try and enable them to have those kinds of conversations with their 50 and 60-year-olds, which they're not very ready to do. Have you found organizations open to this kind of conversation? Are there anybody doing this well that you have seen emerging?
I've seen some interesting examples on the other side of like it being designed, but to what extent was the individuals involved in it? I question. So there are examples like Unilever's U-Work scheme, where they have 3 days a week and then you can scale up or scale down depending on the projects available to you, which is really interesting because it then engages what you can call rare talent. So say in the age of commitments, we kind of missed out a key group that perhaps is underrepresented in work, which is mothers, yeah? Mothers that often are left to pick up the childcare because it's often very expensive now. They can't fit themselves into the way of working of a normal sort of 40-hour week, 9 to 5. There's often a lot more hours than that because they're thinking about school runs, they're thinking about how they can design their life around being a parent. And so the opportunity that you work offers them a way of scaling up, scaling down as the sort of calendar of the year changes, as term time adapts. And so there's even a need to engage the groups between the ones we're talking about with this different way of working. And it's actually beneficial to everyone if we only design it by inviting them into the conversation and finding out that actually we don't have to end work at 5 p.m. on a Friday. We can think about core hours model 11 till 3 and then flexible around the rest that can work for more people. Or we can think about work from anywhere schemes to allow people to visit family back in another country or to even travel, explore the world a little bit as well. There are different ways that it can show up. And it starts with the conversation. It starts with getting everyone in the room and understanding what their goals are.
Yeah, I mean, these three groups, I laugh because I've been pushing this stuff for 25 years. And I now talk about it because everybody's been so hungry for flexibility for so long. Women were the initial push on this for a long, long time. And I used to talk about millennials, perennials, and parents as the majority of the workforce all interested in a very different kind of shape of work. I thought COVID had made some progress, but it looks like we may not quite have captured flexibility quite yet. So I hope your generation is going to join forces on this one.
Yeah, I hope so too. There's definitely
AI reaction. I mean, everybody says that AI will again, impact all of the conversation we've just had. What's your view?
For sure. It definitely will do. To what extent and to whom is the interesting question to ask. Of entry-level roles, 100%. We're seeing that already happen, of it declining for Gen Z or for any generation that's now entering the workforce, them finding their first foot on this ladder that I'd argue doesn't really exist in the same way it used to. They are now struggling to get into their hands. And if the ones that do are often met with more, so we say, absent managers, ones that are less willing to put the time into their investment as mentors as well. And so there's this disconnect between how do we teach the younger generations of learning, and what I'm seeing is this disaggregation of the workplace. So rather than work offering you a place for learning, a place for purpose, a place for friends, a place for progression, it's now becoming increasingly disaggregated, that it's on the individual to design it themselves, and that they should seek all of these things in external third spaces. And then the job should just be a purely financial transaction. And I feel that that is an opportunity for any organization to step in and say, look, we might not be able to do all four of them, but we can start somewhere and we can think about how we can be part of this life chapter for you. And we can give you purpose in this part. We can give you friends in this part. You might need to go and find progression a little bit elsewhere, but we think we can help you move through these skills and this role at that speed. But it doesn't have to be the same way it used to be, but it also doesn't have to be the way it is now, where it's becoming increasingly a money-based relationship.
Yeah, it's like you want to teach them a whole new sort of relational skill, how to connect with a generation that's looking for something that no longer is serviced by organizations. Yeah. But let's end on the individual. And I just want to see, this is great. I mean, I think it's been a long push to get more human appetites and skills answered to in the world of work. And you're reminding us, I think, that appetite for being multiple, not being a single label, never dies. It just keeps reemerging. And the more they try and fit and squish us all into these kind of roles, which my generation may have delayed until later, the more this next generation just doesn't want to shut it down for 20 or 30 years. So what advice would you give somebody who feels pressure to design the perfect life? And I'm putting perfect between quotes, which may be a very inherited view of what perfection looks like. What do you tell them? And what would they get from reading your book, which we will, of course, put in the show notes and encourage everybody to read who's interested in this generation?
I'd say that the word perfect often starts as an external voice. It's a should word, which is one of the most dangerous ones in the English vocabulary. It's other pressure trajected towards you. I say look inward instead rather than looking outward. Seek to understand yourself. Look for why you enjoy certain activities, how they overlap together, what you could show up to and try and experiment with. And if you don't yet know who you are, then how you can get into certain rooms that are going to tell you more about who you are. And as you go, you'll build some momentum. You'll start figuring out, I like that, I don't like that. Oh, that thing really resonates, that one not so much. Okay, great. So now you've got some data, you've got some materials, you can start learning from it rather than starting from an external viewpoint of what you should be doing. Remove the shoulds. We're looking at what you've learned from yourself. And then with that, you can start considering, okay, I want to make sense of this. How do I put it together? Oh, okay, I list out all different options that could bring me closer to each of these different areas of interest. How do I move towards a bit more of sport? How do I move towards a bit more of managing my health in this way? Okay, great. I can try them all. I've done that. And then which ones work, which ones doesn't? Okay, cool. Other learning. Keep running experiments, keep iterating, keep evolving. Eventually you'll find that there's this through line that connects it all. And you might not have the perfect words for it. No one does. You just have the first sentence that makes sense of the chaos. And then you use it to direct yourself. You say, okay, if I have this golden thread that you can find in the book, then you'll make sense of where do I go next that gets me closer to it. And from there, you'll find a much better answer towards a life that's actually aligned rather than one that's perfect.
Wise words from someone so young, which I think is why it's really delightful to be able to recommend your book, Charlie Rogers, Undefinable Life Design, because really everything that you've said is not related to age. It's actually something that comes at different points of life. I actually like your before children and after children, because I think those are the two moments as you sort of enter Q2 or you enter Q3. Those are these big shift moments where, yeah, if you want, you get to start again. And some of the commitments have been achieved, some haven't. Some you can tick the box, some you can't. But it's still a great time to rethink what it is that's going to be your next golden thread. So, Charlie, thanks for your early wisdom. I think running up all those mountains must have done something to your brain. Keep on, keep writing, and we'll keep following you. We wish you much luck.
Thanks so much, Avivah. I appreciate it.
What I loved about this conversation is how clearly it shows that the appetite to live beyond labels isn't a generational quirk. It's a human one. Charlie may be describing the experience of Gen Z, but the questions he raises echo far beyond youth and Q1. How to align work with identity, how to balance freedom and commitment, how to live a life that sustains energy and income. His phrase, golden thread, is a good one. Many of us spend years trying to fit ourselves into roles, categories, and organizational ladders, only to discover late that the better question is not, what should I be, but what keeps connecting across the different versions of me? For companies, this is a useful challenge. If younger workers are refusing old formulas, perhaps that's not immaturity. Perhaps it's early detection of a system that no longer fits longer, more fluid lives and careers. Charlie's part of a generation asking these questions sooner. The rest of us may simply be arriving at them later. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and we are living our 4-quarter lives. For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.